April 20th, 1945. 7:30 hours. The sun has barely breached the horizon, but the streets of the small German town are already littered with the debris of retreat and surrender. Smoke rises in thin curls from the remnants of half-collapsed buildings, their walls riddled with shell marks and the scars of years of neglect. The air is thick with the tang of scorched wood, oil, and a faint metallic smell of blood that has long since dried into the cracks of cobblestone streets. You can almost hear the quiet, tense rhythm of survival that has governed this town for half a decade, the cautious shuffling of boots, the furtive glances from behind shuttered windows. A convoy of army quartermaster trucks rattles through the center square, engines low and grumbling, wheels crunching over broken glass. They carry something entirely unexpected for this place. Pallets of ice cream in metal tubs, neatly stacked, and crates of Coca-Cola, bottles glinting in the weak morning light. The soldiers riding in the trucks are tense but alert, scanning windows, alleys, and rooftops as if expecting an ambush. Their helmets are scuffed, uniforms dust-streaked, boots heavy with mud, but there's a rhythm in their movements born of months of constant pressure, months of advancing through hostile territory. The town's residents, few in number now, peek cautiously from corners, their faces etched with a mixture of fear, relief, and suspicion. Among the few remaining German troops, a Panzergrenadier company, the mood is entirely different. They've surrendered just the night before, hands raised, weapons laid down, knowing resistance is futile. Their uniforms hang loose on gaunt frames, pockets empty, boots worn through at the soles. Hunger is a constant companion. It gnaws in their stomachs and stiffens their joints. They had lived for years on meager rations, often supplemented by foraging, black market purchases, or the occasional stolen loaf of bread. The sight of the American trucks and their contents stops them in their tracks. The first crate of ice cream is unloaded. Soldiers with gloves pull off the lids, revealing blocks of creamy frozen dessert that, for many of these men, represents a sensation they cannot even name. The tubs glisten in the morning light, and a strange, almost religious hush falls over the gathering. Fingers twitch toward the ice cream nervously, hesitant to believe it is real, that it could be theirs. The smell, sweet, rich vanilla and chocolate, sends waves of disbelief rippling through the crowd. A few German soldiers glance at one another, silent, their faces taut with confusion, incredulity, even a flicker of shame. This is not the scarcity they know, this is excess. Nearby, crates of Coca-Cola are cracked open. The clinking of glass bottles and the hiss of carbonation release a sound wholly foreign to ears accustomed to quiet desperation. One German soldier tentatively lifts a bottle, turns it over in his hands, and frowns at the unfamiliar label and the strange brown liquid inside. A sip, a pause, a small gasp, then eyes widen. The cold fizziness hits the tongue with an intensity that contrasts sharply with the warmth and fatigue clinging to their bodies. Others watch, then reach, fingers shaking as they lift their own bottles. For a moment, the simplest pleasures of life, flavor, refreshment, abundance, seem like an alien luxury. The American soldiers note the reactions with a mix of curiosity and guarded amusement. Some shake their heads, half smiling behind their helmets. "Haven't seen that look since Normandy," one quietly mutters to his companion. There is an unspoken understanding among the Americans. This is more than a treat. This is a psychological tool, a bridge between victor and vanquished, a subtle signal that the war's end may bring an unfamiliar, almost surreal peace. And yet, despite the momentary wonder, there's tension simmering just beneath the surface. The German soldiers still carry memories of ambushes, artillery, and sudden death. Suspicion lingers even as ice cream drips from the corners of their mouths. They have been trained to distrust, to anticipate deceit. Can something this sweet, this innocuous, truly be harmless? They glance sideways at their former comrades' empty gaze, trying to reconcile years of hardship with the sudden, almost magical abundance before them. In the shadows of the square, townspeople whisper among themselves, eyeing both sides with trepidation. They have seen the horrors of war. They know the unpredictability of soldiers. Any uniform can bring salvation or destruction. But here, in this rare moment, something fragile and unexpected emerges. Curiosity, hunger mixed with wonder, fatigue tempered by delight. And for a brief, startling moment, the past feels both distant and absurd, a lifetime away from the simple pleasure of ice cream melting in the sun. As the quartermaster trucks finish unloading, a German soldier licks at a dripping cone, eyes wide, and turns to another. Is this real? His companion nods slowly, almost afraid to believe it. The Americans watch, and a shared understanding hangs in the air. They are witnessing a human reaction, raw and unguarded, to something simple yet transformative. The quiet of the town, the smell of smoke, the scars of battle, all are momentarily eclipsed by the improbable arrival of frozen cream and carbonated sweetness. But not all eyes are filled with awe. A few soldiers scan the alleys, restless, tension simmering again. Rumors spread that not all who surrendered are trustworthy, that desperation can turn dangerous. For every sense of wonder, there is a flicker of fear. Could indulgence bring a new danger? Or is it a fleeting taste of something more profound? Peace. The ice cream and Coke glisten in the morning sun, but outside the square, shadows linger, and the town's secrets are not yet fully revealed. The German soldiers are stunned, yes, but what they do next will set the tone for an encounter they will never forget. The morning sun climbs higher, turning the square into a bright, almost surreal stage. You can feel the heat on your neck, the faint metallic tang of past battles lingering in the air. The German soldiers, still reeling from the surrender, drift closer to the pallets of American treats. Their gaunt faces betray exhaustion, malnourishment, and years of deprivation. Each step toward the ice cream and Coca-Cola seems hesitant, as if fear has been baked into their very bones. The war has trained them to expect punishment, betrayal, or sudden violence, and now they are faced with something wholly different. Generosity wrapped in an unfamiliar language. A corporal steps forward first, gloved hands shaking. He peers into a tub of ice cream, taking in the creamy texture, the perfectly swirled chocolate and vanilla. He dips a finger almost reverently and tastes. His eyes widen in disbelief. For years he has eaten rations that were barely edible, dry bread, watery soup, preserved meat that often reeked of decay. And now sweetness, coldness, richness, a sensation that seems almost unreal. He looks around, expecting someone to call him back to duty or worse, accuse him of indulgence. But there is only quiet. The Americans, standing a few feet away, watch him carefully, ensuring order is maintained but offering no judgment. Other soldiers follow, their motions awkward and hesitant. Some whisper to one another in low tones, questions tangled with disbelief. How can this be real? Is it safe? Are they mocking us? Their eyes scan the trucks, the neatly packed crates, the gleaming bottles of Coca-Cola. One man even lifts a bottle, shakes it gently, then presses it to his lips, gasping at the fizzy explosion that sends tingles up his throat. For many, it is the first taste of sweetness in months, some for years. They sip, swallow, and pause, caught between indulgence and incredulity. The novelty overwhelms them, and their minds struggle to reconcile what they see with the harsh reality of the past. You can almost see the war etched into every movement. The soldiers' hands tremble, not just from hunger but from disbelief. They have been trained to handle rifles, grenades, and machine guns, but they have never encountered something that is indulgent without cost or consequence. Some try to share their discoveries with one another, pointing to flavors, textures, and sensations they cannot name. A small group huddles over a crate, comparing bottles of Coke, sniffing the soda, laughing in disbelief, their voices tentative but tinged with relief. For a moment, camaraderie is reborn in the simplest form, shared wonder. Yet the underlying tension persists. Years of malnutrition have left the men weak, and some stagger under the sudden rush of sugar and cold. Their bodies are unused to such richness. One soldier's knees buckle slightly as he lifts a cone to his mouth, and another catches him just in time. A ripple of laughter follows, awkward and halting, as if humor itself is foreign. This small, human moment becomes a thread of normalcy, an almost painful reminder of what they have been denied for so long. The townspeople observe from the edges, faces wary but curious. They have lived through occupation, bombardment, and the chaos of retreat. Some cling to walls, watching the strange new interactions, their expressions oscillating between hope and disbelief. Could it be that the same soldiers who brought destruction are now offering pleasure without consequence? They whisper to each other in hushed tones, their voices trembling with a mixture of caution and longing. For them, these American trucks and their miraculous contents are both a sign of liberation and a puzzle. What does this generosity mean, and how long will it last? The American soldiers coordinate the distribution with military precision, mindful of the crowding and the fragile mood. Each tub of ice cream, each crate of soda is carefully handed out, ensuring that the German soldiers are not overwhelmed or panicked. Yet even with strict order, the reactions are uncontrollable. Laughter, gasps, and whispered incredulity ripple through the group. Some men take multiple servings, unable to resist the temptation, while others linger hesitant, unsure if indulgence can be allowed. The contrast between their malnourished frames and the sudden abundance is striking, almost surreal. Nearby, a young German private, thin as a rail, holds a melting scoop of vanilla ice cream, his eyes brimming with tears. He has survived the war, the retreat, and the hunger, but this simple pleasure unmasks every suppressed desire he has carried. He glances at the American soldiers, unsure if gratitude is permitted, unsure if he should fear the sudden kindness. The raw emotional complexity of the moment is palpable. Joy interwoven with guilt, relief tinged with disbelief. The cold, sweet ice cream and the fizzy Coke are not just treats, they are symbols of a world that the German soldiers had almost stopped believing in. In their minds, the war had consumed every possibility for comfort or pleasure. And now, in this small, battered town, they are forced to confront a reality that defies logic. Abundance, generosity, and indulgence in a place they had only associated with deprivation. But even as they taste, laugh, and stare in wonder, unease creeps back in. Years of suspicion cannot be fully erased by sugar and soda. Some soldiers eye the corners of the square, the empty alleys, the silent windows. Is there something hidden in this sudden generosity? Or is it simply the first taste of a world that might exist beyond the war? Their wonder is real, but so is the tension, and the moment will not last forever. By late morning, the square has transformed from a silent, battle-scarred stretch of cobblestone into a scene of cautious festivity. The American quartermaster trucks have finished unloading, and the German soldiers, gaunt and weary, are clustered around the pallets, each with a tub of ice cream or a bottle of Coca-Cola in hand. The sensation of holding something cold and sweet is overwhelming for men who have subsisted on thin soup, black bread, and the occasional scrap of meat for months, even years. Every lick of the ice cream is met with wide-eyed disbelief. Every sip of the fizzy soda triggers a small, involuntary shiver of pleasure. Some men sit on the curbstones, hunched over, as if trying to absorb the indulgence slowly, unwilling to let it end. A scoop of vanilla ice cream melts quickly under the rising sun, dripping onto the hands of a soldier who barely notices, too focused on the sensation itself. Chocolate, strawberry, and a swirl of vanilla and chocolate, colors, smells, and flavors that seem almost obscene in their richness, fill the senses in a town where monotony and scarcity had long been the law of survival. Their eyes dart toward one another, silently asking, "Is this really for us?" The answer seems almost too simple, yet undeniable. Yes, it is. The Coke is equally mesmerizing. Bottles clink as they are uncapped, releasing a hiss that draws attention from every corner of the square. German soldiers tilt them back cautiously at first, uncertain how to handle something so effervescent and cold. Then comes the reaction. Wide eyes, gasps, the sudden realization that this sweet, fizzy drink is entirely unlike anything they have ever tasted. Some try to describe it to one another, gestures accompanying awkward phrases. "Sweet, cold bubbles." One soldier laughs quietly, the sound halting and rusty from disuse, and another joins, a ripple of unexpected joy spreading through the group. The contrast is stark. A year of meager rations, hunger pangs, and ration tickets is erased, momentarily, by something so simple and human. The soldiers' bodies respond before their minds can catch up. Smiles, laughter, wide-eyed looks, and a few shaky hands as they attempt to balance cups and cones. One man, clearly overwhelmed, collapses briefly onto the cobblestone, sighing as the richness spreads through his mouth, a sensation at once alien and exquisite. The experience is almost spiritual, an encounter with abundance so sudden it feels like magic, a glimpse of a world untouched by the brutal logic of rationing and survival. Observers, both American and German, note the surreal nature of the scene. The Americans maintain professional composure, though a few cannot suppress subtle smiles. They know the power of food and comfort as psychological tools, and yet there is no pretense here. The German soldiers' reactions are raw, unfiltered. Some clutch the ice cream as if it were a treasure, others hesitate, unsure whether indulgence is permitted after years of enforced scarcity. Even the act of eating, a basic human necessity, has become a spectacle of disbelief. Townspeople watch from broken windows, leaning cautiously forward. They have seen horrors, sieges, and death, yet they too are captivated by this sudden display of abundance. A child peers from behind a shuttered doorway, eyes wide at the colorful tubs of ice cream and the strange brown liquid the soldiers sip from glass bottles. For the townspeople, the treats are a signal. The war is over here, at least for now. The American presence promises something entirely new, the possibility of normalcy, even joy. And yet, amid the wonder, hesitation lingers. The German soldiers, despite the delight, cannot entirely shed years of training and fear. Some glance toward their former comrades' empty positions, toward silent streets where danger could still be hiding. There is a lingering question: is this abundance a trick? One soldier turns to a companion, whispering with a trace of caution in his voice, "Why would they bring us this? Why now?" The doubt is palpable even as hands continue to scoop and sip. The sensory overload is intense. The coldness of the ice cream contrasts sharply with the warmth of the sun, the sweetness cutting through months of hunger, the fizziness of the soda tingling on tongues unaccustomed to such stimulation. Each sensation is amplified by context. Years of deprivation, the sudden surrender, the presence of occupying forces. The emotional mix is dizzying. Relief, disbelief, joy, and underlying anxiety swirl together, producing reactions that are at once human and deeply telling of the war's toll. Small moments of interaction reveal more about the men than words ever could. One soldier helps another who struggles to balance a melting cone, an instinctive act of care that transcends suspicion. Another group huddles in silent awe over a crate of sodas, comparing tastes and exchanging cautious smiles. A corporal, himself hesitant, lifts a bottle for a tentative sip, then nods slowly, sharing the gesture with a private beside him. The ritual of consumption, mundane in peacetime, has become extraordinary, a bridge between fear and normalcy. But the day is far from over. Even as indulgence takes hold, shadows linger in the streets. The town is scarred, the war is not fully behind them, and the soldiers' bodies and minds are fragile after years of deprivation. The contrast between abundance and emptiness, luxury and survival, has opened a window into something unfamiliar and potentially destabilizing. The American soldiers, watching the German reactions, exchange knowing glances. They recognize that this encounter, simple as it seems, carries consequences. It could foster trust, resentment, or sheer confusion. And the German soldiers, though momentarily lost in the sweetness, cannot entirely ignore the reality around them. The question hangs in the warm morning air. How long can this moment last, and what will the soldiers do once the sugar wears off? By mid-morning, the square hums with a quiet, almost surreal energy. German soldiers cluster around the quartermaster trucks, melting ice cream dripping down gloved fingers, soda bottles clutched in calloused hands. Laughter bubbles here and there, but it is hesitant, restrained, a reaction not fully trusted by those who have spent years conditioned to fear sudden pleasures. The sensory onslaught is almost dizzying. The sweetness of the ice cream, the sharp fizziness of Coca-Cola, the warmth of the sun on tired shoulders, and the faint smell of smoke still lingering in the streets. Each sense is overwhelmed in its own way, tugging the men into an unfamiliar and uncomfortable indulgence. A young private leans against a battered wall, cone in hand, eyes darting as he watches others around him. He's eager, almost desperate to join the shared delight, yet suspicion lingers at the edges of his mind. Years of scarcity have left him alert to deception. Generosity, particularly from enemies, feels inherently suspect. He watches the American soldiers, noting their disciplined demeanor, their calm observation of distribution. Are they merely overseeing, or is there some ulterior motive, some hidden test? This tension ripples quietly among the German soldiers, wonder mixed with anxiety, indulgence tempered by suspicion. A corporal kneels to help another soldier whose ice cream has slipped onto the cobblestone, and the gesture sparks a ripple of quiet murmurs. Moments of human connection appear fragile, almost sacred, yet they are tinged with the undercurrent of mistrust. A conversation sparks in low voices. Why would they do this? Is it a trick? We've been starving for years and now ice cream. Their words trail off, swallowed by the warmth of the morning and the sweetness coating their tongues. Even as enjoyment spreads, the contrast between the present and the past remains impossible to ignore. The memories of meager rations, harsh winters, and endless marches haunt the men in subtle ways. Some pause mid-sip, eyes distant, recollecting weeks of hollow hunger, of hiding in damp cellars for food scraps, of watching comrades fade from exhaustion and disease. The luxury before them is almost guilt-inducing. How could something so trivial, ice cream, soda, hold such power to stir both joy and shame? Across the square, a German soldier sits with a dripping cone, head tilted back, eyes closed as he lets the cold sweetness coat his tongue. A laugh escapes him, hesitant but genuine. Another soldier notices and smiles, the gesture small but meaningful, a silent acknowledgement that this moment of reprieve, however fleeting, is shared. Yet the shadow of reality persists. They have surrendered, and surrender carries consequences. Some men glance toward the edges of the square, watching for signs of American enforcement, for sudden gestures of authority that might remind them of their precarious position. Meanwhile, the American soldiers remain vigilant. Their expressions betray little, but each movement is calculated, each glance purposeful. They understand the psychological weight of food, of luxury suddenly granted to those who have endured deprivation. They also know that order must be maintained. The presence of abundance in a recently surrendered town is a delicate balance. One misstep could provoke panic, envy, or aggression among the soldiers or townspeople. The quiet tension is palpable, hovering over the laughter and astonishment like a shadow. The townspeople, observing from broken windows and doorways, whisper among themselves. They have lived through bombings, occupation, and retreat. They recognize the shock on the faces of the German soldiers, a reflection of their own astonishment at the sudden arrival of such luxuries. Some children peek from behind shutters, hands pressed to their mouths, wide-eyed. For a brief moment, the horrors of the war are suspended. Ice cream and soda, mundane comforts in other times and places, become symbols of a fragile hope. And yet there is an unease beneath the delight. Even as the German soldiers laugh, sip, and savor, some remain rigid, scanning alleys, rooftops, and corners. The instinct to suspect, to anticipate danger has been honed over years of war. Could indulgence be a trap? Could the Americans suddenly demand compliance, or worse, take vengeance for the years of conflict? The pleasure of the moment exists side by side with the tension of survival, creating a paradoxical mixture of joy and fear. One soldier, with ice cream dripping down his glove, glances toward a bottle of Coca-Cola. He lifts it cautiously, tilts it to his lips, and then pauses mid-sip. His eyes meet those of a nearby corporal, and in that glance a silent question: can something this good really exist in a world that has only known deprivation? The corporal nods, a tentative acknowledgement that the indulgence is real, and yet even that reassurance cannot erase the underlying tension. The subtle interplay of emotion, curiosity, pleasure, disbelief, anxiety, is mirrored throughout the square. Every gesture, every sip, every shared smile carries weight. These men, hardened by years of conflict, are navigating uncharted emotional territory. The luxury of ice cream and soda has disrupted the familiar hierarchy of hunger, fear, and survival. And as the sun climbs higher, casting a golden light over melting cones and glistening bottles, one question lingers in the air, unspoken yet pressing. How long can this fragile reprieve last before reality intrudes? The first ripple of a more serious concern begins to show. One German soldier notices a crate left unattended at the edge of the square, and his eyes narrow. Is it a trap, or just oversight? The question spreads silently among others nearby, a shadow crossing the warm morning of indulgence. The tension, though faint, hints that even in this moment of surreal delight, the war has not entirely loosened its grip on their instincts. By early afternoon, the square has settled into a rhythm of cautious indulgence. German soldiers, still gaunt and wary, have begun to grow accustomed to the sensation of sweetness and cold on their tongues. The ice cream tubs are dented and scratched from enthusiastic scooping, and the Coca-Cola bottles are streaked with condensation mingling with the dust and grime of weeks spent in the field. Yet beneath this moment of apparent ease, the tension of years of conflict simmers quietly. The soldiers are no longer in combat, but surrender has its own psychological toll, one that cannot be erased even by the novelty of ice cream and soda. The corporal who had hesitated earlier now sits on a low stone wall, a melting cone in one hand and a bottle of Coca-Cola in the other. He observes his companions, trying to read their reactions. Some are laughing openly now, a sound that feels fragile, almost tentative, as if each laugh might shatter under the weight of past trauma. Others remain still, eyes darting, scanning the square and the surrounding streets as if expecting danger to materialize. The war has trained them to expect ambush at every corner, and years of malnutrition and deprivation have left their bodies and minds perpetually alert to threats. Even pleasure is not immune from suspicion. Nearby, a group of soldiers experiments with flavors. One dips a finger into chocolate ice cream and then into a swirl of vanilla, watching intently as the two combine on his fingertip. He tastes cautiously, nods, and murmurs to his companion, who tries to mimic the gesture. Laughter bubbles up again, soft and hesitant, breaking through the tension for a moment. The Americans watch with quiet amusement and careful vigilance, ensuring that order is maintained without interfering. They recognize the delicate balance they are maintaining. The soldiers' joy must be allowed, but not allowed to tip into chaos. Townspeople move cautiously along the edges of the square, observing the surreal scene. Some whisper to each other, speculating on the sudden generosity of the occupying soldiers. Others clutch small scraps of paper or cloth, remnants of ration tickets and supplies that have become meaningless in the face of abundance. Children peek from shuttered windows, faces pressed against glass, eyes wide with wonder at the colorful tubs of ice cream and the strange brown bottles. For these civilians, the scene is both hope and bewilderment. They have seen destruction, hunger, and fear, and now they are witnessing something completely unexpected, comfort and pleasure offered without immediate consequence. But even as enjoyment spreads, the psychological complexity of surrender lingers. The German soldiers are learning slowly that the world they knew, the world of scarcity, fear, and constant threat, has shifted. They have surrendered, and yet they are not punished. They are allowed indulgence. They are allowed pleasure. And this creates an entirely new, disorienting dynamic. Some glance at their former comrades' empty positions, wondering what it would have meant to be captured elsewhere. Others glance at the Americans, uncertainty clouding their expressions. Can trust be built in such a brief moment? Or is this generosity only a temporary illusion, destined to vanish once the Americans move on? A small incident underscores the fragility of the moment. One soldier, giddy from sugar and novelty, accidentally spills his ice cream onto the cobblestone. He gasps, unsure whether to react in shame or amusement. Another soldier rushes to help him, picking up the remnants, brushing off dirt, and offering a reassuring pat on the shoulder. For an instant, camaraderie resurfaces in a town that has seen betrayal, suspicion, and defeat. But it is fragile, built on indulgence and novelty, and the tension that underlies it cannot be ignored. The ice cream and soda, simple as they are, act as more than food or drink. They are a symbol of the strange new world the German soldiers find themselves in, a world where abundance exists alongside surrender, where the once dominant power of fear is softened by generosity. The men are forced to reconcile years of deprivation and hardship with the surreal luxury in front of them. Each lick, each sip, is a small act of adaptation, an experiment in trust, an exploration of what it means to live in a world where war has temporarily lifted its harshest rules. Even as delight spreads across faces, there are reminders of reality. The town remains scarred, buildings still smolder in places, streets are pocked with shell holes, and the distant rumble of artillery echoes faintly from outside the immediate area. Hunger may be temporarily satiated, but exhaustion, trauma, and the experience of surrender are not so easily dissolved. Soldiers occasionally glance toward alleys and rooftops, alert for any signs of trouble. Their smiles are real, but they are cautious, shaded by the vigilance that has kept them alive through years of conflict. One private, cone in hand, finally relaxes enough to lean back and watch the American soldiers overseeing the distribution. He notices the precision with which they move, the subtle signals exchanged between officers. This is no random generosity. It is measured, controlled, deliberate. The realization adds another layer of complexity to the experience. Pleasure has been allowed, yes, but within the parameters of authority, observation, and control. And yet, for all the caution, delight cannot be fully suppressed. Ice cream melts quickly in the spring sun, soda fizzes and drips, laughter erupts, and astonished glances meet one another across the square. The German soldiers, surrendered yet alive, wary yet indulging, are experiencing something profoundly human, the rediscovery of pleasure, even in the shadow of loss and defeat. But as the afternoon sun climbs, the soldiers sense an unspoken question lingering in the air. How will this strange, indulgent world affect the fragile boundaries of surrender, obedience, and survival? The answer is uncertain, and the square, brimming with sweet treats and tension, holds its breath. As the afternoon stretches on, the initial thrill of indulgence begins to settle into a slower, more contemplative rhythm. The German soldiers, still clustering around the pallets of ice cream and crates of Coca-Cola, have begun to relax slightly, but suspicion lingers like a shadow at the edges of the square. The novelty has not yet lost its power, yet their years of deprivation and wariness do not allow them to fully surrender to it. Their gaunt faces, streaked with dirt and sweat, betray the inner tension of men who are simultaneously exhilarated and uncertain. A corporal lifts a scoop of chocolate ice cream to his mouth, tasting it with a deliberate, almost reverent slowness. He glances toward the nearby Americans, their posture still vigilant, and his brow furrows. The soldiers have been trained for obedience under threat, for survival through constant vigilance. How does one navigate a world where generosity arrives without immediate consequence? The question cannot be answered quickly, and the slow melt of ice cream mirrors the creeping uncertainty in their minds. Around him, the men begin to converse in low, hesitant tones. One whispers about the rations he has lived on for months, comparing them with the richness of the ice cream. Another marvels at the bubbles in his Coca-Cola, shaking the bottle slightly to see the liquid dance before sipping again. There is awe in their voices, but it is tempered by a persistent undercurrent of doubt. One private mutters, almost to himself, "Why would they give us this? Why now? It is a question with no immediate answer, a puzzle that challenges the logic the soldiers have relied on for survival. The townspeople, observing from broken windows and alleyways, sense the subtle tension among the soldiers. Their eyes follow every movement, every whispered conversation, every tentative sip. For them, the ice cream and soda are not just symbols of abundance. They are markers of power and control. The American soldiers have dictated the pace, the portions, and the rules of indulgence, and this careful orchestration is understood on a subconscious level by all present. The civilians' fascination is tinged with cautious optimism. The war may be ending here, but it has left its fingerprints in ways both obvious and subtle. In the square, one private tentatively offers his ice cream cone to another, a gesture that is small, almost imperceptible, yet loaded with significance. Sharing, an instinct that had been suppressed by scarcity and fear, begins to reemerge. Another soldier smiles faintly, nodding in gratitude, and together they laugh softly at the novelty of their situation. This fragile camaraderie born of shared indulgence is a fragile bridge between the soldiers' hardened instincts and the human need for connection. Yet even in this moment of quiet unity, suspicion is not absent. The Americans are still watching, the distribution is controlled, the parameters of indulgence are set. Some soldiers begin to experiment more boldly. A private dips his ice cream into another flavor, creating a swirl of colors and textures. Another soldier shakes a bottle of Coca-Cola and pops the cap with a careful hiss, watching the effervescent liquid escape before tasting. Each experiment is accompanied by cautious observation, an unspoken assessment of potential consequences. Even pleasure has become a form of strategy, a careful navigation of unknown territory. The sensory experience overwhelms them. The cold sweetness of ice cream contrasts sharply with the warmth of the spring sun. The fizzy bite of soda lingers on their tongues, awakening a sensation long dormant. Some close their eyes, savoring the moment, letting their bodies respond before their minds can catch up. Others remain tense, scanning rooftops, alleys, and the edges of the square, unable to fully relax. Hunger has been briefly satiated, but vigilance remains a habit too ingrained to ignore. The Americans continue to monitor, subtle but attentive. Their disciplined presence reinforces the boundaries of indulgence, the unspoken rules governing the interaction. Soldiers cannot simply abandon themselves to pleasure. It exists within the structure of control. And the German soldiers, fully aware of the invisible hierarchy, navigate this delicate dance with a mixture of awe and caution. They are learning a new lesson, that pleasure, generosity, and authority can coexist in a world that has spent years demanding sacrifice and fear. Yet beneath the sweetness, shadows linger. One private notices an unopened crate at the corner of the square, its contents unknown. He glances toward a fellow soldier, and their eyes meet in silent understanding. There is curiosity, certainly, but also suspicion. They have been trained to anticipate deception, and even the simplest gestures of generosity are measured against the memory of years of manipulation and scarcity. The square is a paradoxical space. Joy and fear coexist, pleasure is tempered by caution, and indulgence is shadowed by doubt. As the afternoon wanes, the soldiers' senses remain captivated, but the tension quietly grows. The ice cream melts faster in the sun, the soda fizzes and drips, laughter softens into contemplative silence. Each man is aware, if only subconsciously, that this indulgence is temporary, a window into a world that has existed outside of hunger and fear for them but may not last. And somewhere in the back of every mind, a quiet question pulses. What happens when the sweetness ends? As the sun begins its slow descent toward late afternoon, the square takes on a golden glow. Dust hangs in the air, catching the light like faint sparks. The German soldiers, gaunt and still wary, have begun to navigate a strange new reality. Surrender does not always equate to humiliation, and indulgence does not always come with immediate consequence. Ice cream cones melt slowly in their hands, Coca-Cola drips down fingers, and yet laughter, hesitant but genuine, ripples across the square. These moments are fleeting, fragile, but they carry a weight far beyond their apparent simplicity. A corporal leans back against a battered wall, cone in hand, eyes sweeping over the men around him. They are learning, slowly, that small pleasures can exist even in a world defined by hardship and war. A private beside him takes careful, deliberate sips of soda, savoring the cold, fizzy sweetness, and smiles faintly. The gesture is subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it carries a quiet lesson. Indulgence, once forbidden or rare, is now allowed, and perhaps even safe. The soldiers exchange glances, and in those fleeting moments, unspoken connections are formed. Sharing ice cream or a sip of soda becomes more than an act of sustenance. It becomes a symbol of trust, a signal that in surrender there can still be dignity, and that human needs extend beyond mere survival. One soldier offers the last scoop from his tub to another who had been too hesitant to take one. The gesture is met with a smile, a nod, and a quiet acknowledgement of camaraderie rediscovered in an unexpected place. But the shadows of doubt remain. A few soldiers hover near the edges of the square, scanning rooftops and alleyways. Years of combat have left deep scars, and instinctive caution cannot be erased by the novelty of ice cream or soda. The question lingers in quiet corners of their minds. Is this indulgence truly safe, or a subtle test of obedience? Every taste, every smile, every small gesture of sharing is measured against the weight of experience, creating a tension that hums beneath the apparent levity of the moment. Meanwhile, the townspeople continue to observe from the safety of their windows and doorways. They have witnessed destruction, retreat, and surrender, and now they watch a different drama unfold, one in which human fragility and resilience are laid bare. The sight of German soldiers enjoying simple luxuries, sharing smiles, and laughing softly is almost alien. For the civilians, the American distribution of ice cream and soda is a symbol of both authority and benevolence. It represents a world beyond fear, yet it also highlights the fragility of human behavior in the face of uncertainty. The Americans maintain their disciplined watch, understanding that this moment is both delicate and powerful. The distribution is structured, orderly, yet there is room for humanity within the system. They know that even a small act, such as offering food or drink, can reshape the psychology of surrender, can foster cooperation or at least calm. In this square, ice cream and soda have become tools of subtle influence, bridging the divide between conqueror and conquered in ways that neither violence nor words could achieve. A private wipes melting chocolate from his fingers and glances around the square, observing his comrades' reactions. Some are laughing more freely now, the initial hesitation replaced with cautious enjoyment. Others remain still, eyes flicking toward every corner, a silent reminder that vigilance is never fully abandoned. Even in surrender, the soldiers are learning to reconcile pleasure with survival, indulgence with prudence, and trust with experience. Each moment becomes a lesson in navigating a reality that is simultaneously new and disorienting. The tactile experience of the treats reinforces this duality. Ice cream melts quickly in the warm spring sun, reminding them of impermanence. Coca-Cola fizzes and hisses as bottles are opened, the sound sharp and fleeting like the small joys themselves. Every taste is heightened by context. Deprivation has sharpened their senses to the pleasures that many would take for granted. And each indulgence is shadowed by the awareness that their safety, their temporary reprieve, is contingent upon their cooperation and their observation of subtle rules. Even as delight spreads, there are hints of tension in quiet corners. One soldier notices a partially opened crate, its contents unknown. His eyes narrow, and he subtly shifts closer to a comrade, whispering a question that is met with a cautious nod. It is a reminder that even in moments of wonder, years of war leave an imprint too deep to ignore. Trust is being tested, even as enjoyment flourishes. And yet, for all the underlying tension, the German soldiers are discovering a profound truth. Surrender does not have to be dehumanizing. In the delicate balance of authority and indulgence, of vigilance and pleasure, they are experiencing the small lessons of humanity, the quiet rediscovery of joy, of shared smiles, of simple pleasures. But as the shadows lengthen across the cobblestones, an unspoken question hovers in the warm afternoon air. How will this newfound indulgence, however small, alter the delicate psychology of surrender, obedience, and adaptation? The answer is uncertain, and the square, rich with sweetness and tension, waits silently for the next moment to reveal itself. Late afternoon settles over the town, and the warm light of the sun casts long shadows across the cobblestone square. The ice cream is melting faster now, drips running down gloves, sleeves, and onto the rough stones beneath. German soldiers sit, stand, and lean in clusters, some licking at cones with childlike intensity, others holding bottles of Coca-Cola with a cautious grip. Even as indulgence spreads, a quiet wariness hums just beneath the surface, a reminder that pleasure and suspicion are never far apart in the lives of men trained for survival. One private dips a cone into a swirl of chocolate and vanilla, watching the melting mixture carefully before taking a hesitant bite. His eyes widen at the cold, creamy sweetness, a reaction almost too raw to contain. He glances around at the others, gauging whether anyone notices the small tremor of joy that flickers across his face. Around him, others share similar experiences, tentative delight mingled with disbelief. They have lived so long with deprivation that pleasure itself feels foreign, even dangerous. A group of soldiers gathers near a crate of Coca-Cola. One twists the cap off carefully, hissing as carbonation escapes, and takes a cautious sip. The bubbles sting, the sweetness floods his tongue, and he pauses, savoring the novelty. Another soldier, curious and uncertain, mimics the action, their eyes meeting in silent acknowledgement. Each sip, each taste, becomes an act of discovery, a negotiation between the body's longing and the mind's lingering caution. Even in these small moments of indulgence, past trauma asserts itself. A corporal shifts uncomfortably, scanning the edges of the square for threats, while the childlike joy of holding a cone contrasts sharply with the rigidity ingrained by years of combat and deprivation. Soldiers laugh, yes, but the laughter is intermittent, hesitant, broken by glances at alleyways, shuttered windows, and the invisible boundaries of authority. The war may have paused, yet its echoes remain, shaping every interaction. The townspeople, peering from doorways and windows, witness the scene with a mix of curiosity and astonishment. They have lived through bombings, occupation, and retreat, and now they see a surreal tableau, former soldiers, hardened and gaunt, indulging in luxuries that once would have seemed impossible. The American presence, quiet but authoritative, underscores a subtle power dynamic. The distribution of ice cream and soda is more than nourishment. It is a demonstration of control softened by benevolence. Civilians understand instinctively that indulgence and authority are entwined here, and they watch cautiously, unsure how long this delicate balance will last. Some German soldiers begin to share their spoils with one another. A private offers the last scoop from his cone to a companion whose ice cream has melted away. Another hands over a bottle of Coca-Cola, and the gesture is met with a tentative smile. These small acts of generosity are laden with significance. For men trained to compete for every scrap, every morsel, the choice to share represents both a relaxation of suspicion and a tentative reclaiming of humanity. Yet beneath these moments of connection, doubt persists. One soldier notices a crate slightly ajar near the edge of the square, its contents obscured. He glances at a comrade, eyes narrowing with caution. The unspoken question hangs in the air. Is this another test, another trap? Even as their bodies revel in sweetness and cold, their minds remain vigilant, scanning for deception. Years of hunger, fear, and combat cannot be easily erased, and indulgence has become a complicated negotiation between desire and distrust. The sensory experience is profound. Ice cream melts against their tongues, cold and sweet, awakening sensations long dormant. Coca-Cola fizzes and dances, tangling with taste buds that have been starved for variety. Every flavor is amplified by context. The scarcity of the past makes indulgence feel almost sacred. Soldiers close their eyes, savoring each moment, letting pleasure wash over them in small, careful doses. Yet the shadow of suspicion is never far, a quiet hum that shapes even the simplest gestures of enjoyment. In one corner, a corporal watches a private nervously sip his soda, then glance toward the American soldiers. The subtle observation is not one of judgment, but of human instinct, measuring boundaries, gauging safety, and testing whether indulgence can be trusted. The act of consuming, once mundane, has become a delicate exercise in negotiation between human need, fear, and the unseen rules imposed by surrender. And as the sun tilts toward the horizon, a quiet question begins to ripple through the square. How will this strange, transient indulgence influence the soldiers' understanding of power, obedience, and pleasure? The ice cream drips, the soda fizzes, and the soldiers, surrendered yet alert, wonder how long the sweetness will last and what it might mean for the fragile world they now inhabit. Evening settles over the town, softening the hard edges of buildings and the scars of battle. Shadows stretch across the cobblestones, cool air beginning to replace the warmth of the afternoon. The ice cream tubs are nearly empty, and most of the Coca-Cola bottles have been drained or set aside, condensation glimmering in the fading light. The German soldiers sit and stand in clusters, licking the last drops from cones, wiping soda from their fingers, and occasionally exchanging quiet words. A sense of calm has begun to descend, yet the day's unusual indulgence weighs heavily on their thoughts. The corporal, who has been quietly observing the distribution throughout the day, leans against a low wall, cone in hand, chewing thoughtfully. He watches the other men, noting the subtle changes in behavior. Laughter is more relaxed now, but it is accompanied by a new, almost reflective quality. The soldiers are beginning to process the implications of what they have just experienced, abundance without immediate consequence. For some, the novelty is disorienting, an almost foreign form of freedom. For others, it raises questions about trust, authority, and the future that lies ahead. A private shivers slightly from the lingering cold of his melting ice cream, glancing at a bottle of Coca-Cola resting on the stone beside him. The carbonation has left his lips tingling, and he realizes he has been laughing openly for the first time in months. Yet even in this moment of physical pleasure, his mind flickers to caution. Could indulgence be a trap? Could it be a test of obedience? Years of deprivation and the constant tension of survival have left the soldiers hyper-aware of consequences, and they cannot easily abandon this vigilance. Around the square, small gestures continue to ripple quietly. One soldier passes the last scraps of ice cream to another, who hesitates briefly before accepting. Another carefully hands over the remaining sip of Coca-Cola. These exchanges are more than acts of generosity. They are subtle negotiations of trust, the first fragile bonds forming among men who have been conditioned to prioritize survival above all else. The shared experience of abundance becomes a lens through which the soldiers begin to re-examine relationships, hierarchy, and human connection. Townspeople peek cautiously from windows and doorways, watching the aftermath of the distribution. Children press their faces to shattered glass, eyes wide with wonder. Adults exchange quiet whispers, processing the surreal spectacle of former soldiers, gaunt and war-weary, indulging openly in luxuries they could barely imagine. To the townspeople, the ice cream and Coca-Cola are not merely treats. They are symbols of a strange, new world that is being carefully introduced, a world in which authority and abundance coexist, at least temporarily. The American soldiers maintain their presence at the edges of the square, calm, vigilant, and unobtrusive. They recognize the subtle power of the moment. The distribution of food and drink has not only nourished bodies but also shaped psychology. In surrender, indulgence has become a tool for control, a way to foster cooperation, and a demonstration of benevolent authority. They observe the German soldiers' reactions, noting subtle shifts in posture, eye contact, and behavior. Each interaction is measured, each gesture intentional. Yet even as the soldiers relax, a quiet unease persists. A few glance repeatedly toward the edges of the square, aware that the world beyond this temporary indulgence remains harsh and unpredictable. Hunger may have been temporarily alleviated, but the lessons of war, the need for vigilance, the anticipation of betrayal, cannot be so easily discarded. Pleasure has been granted, yes, but it exists alongside doubt, a fragile truce between desire and caution. The sensory impressions of the day linger, the sweetness of ice cream on their tongues, the sharp fizziness of soda still tingling, the warmth of the sun fading into the cool evening. The soldiers close their eyes at moments, savoring the sensations while the mind quietly calculates risks. They have tasted abundance, felt indulgence, and yet the lessons of deprivation remain. Each man carries a private awareness that this is not permanence. It is a fleeting taste of something greater, a hint of a world that exists beyond the rigid constraints of war. One soldier, sitting slightly apart from the others, examines an empty Coca-Cola bottle in his hands. The glass glints in the dying sunlight. He thinks of months, even years of scarcity, of marching long distances with nothing but meager rations to sustain him. And now this, sweetness, cold, pleasure, abundance. He cannot reconcile the immediacy of the indulgence with the long arc of deprivation. For a moment he allows himself to wonder, what comes next? How will this change us, if only for a day? The square falls into a quiet lull. Conversations are subdued, laughter soft, movements slower. The soldiers are digesting more than food. They are digesting an unfamiliar world, one in which pleasure, abundance, and surrender intersect. And just as they begin to believe they understand this fragile equilibrium, a distant rumble echoes faintly, a reminder that the war outside this small town has not yet fully ended. Twilight descends on the small German town, and the square, once a chaotic swirl of anticipation and indulgence, now rests in a quiet, almost reverent stillness. The last rays of the sun stretch across cobblestones, glinting on empty ice cream tubs and spent Coca-Cola bottles. The American quartermaster trucks, their day's work complete, sit idle at the edge of the square, engines humming softly in the cooling air. The soldiers, both German and American, have entered a rhythm of quiet observation, reflection, and cautious satisfaction. The German soldiers, gaunt and worn, sit in small clusters, some leaning against walls, others resting on low stones, cones and bottles abandoned at their sides. Their faces, streaked with the dust and sweat of months in the field, now carry the faint glow of surprise, amusement, and tentative relief. Some lick at the remnants of melted ice cream on their gloves, savoring the lingering taste. Others raise empty Coca-Cola bottles to their lips one last time, appreciating the sharp, fizzy sweetness that has marked a day unlike any they have known in years. For the first time in a long while, the soldiers allow themselves to consider the notion that indulgence, even in a world defined by war and deprivation, can exist without immediate consequence. The psychological weight of surrender has shifted subtly. They have been given abundance without punishment, pleasure without threat, and for a brief moment, they are confronted with the possibility of a world that extends beyond ration tickets, scarcity, and suspicion. It is a fragile, disorienting experience, joy tempered by instinctual caution, but it plants a seed of understanding that human experience cannot be entirely consumed by conflict. A corporal sits slightly apart from the others, gazing at the horizon where the sun dips behind ruined rooftops. The day's indulgence has left him reflective, aware that the simple pleasure of ice cream and soda has stirred emotions long dormant: curiosity, trust, camaraderie, and even wonder. He recalls the faces of his men as they tasted the treats for the first time, eyes wide, hesitations dissolving into laughter, small acts of sharing and care. He recognizes that in surrender, even the smallest comforts carry enormous psychological weight. The townspeople, cautiously emerging from their windows and doorways, move quietly among the edges of the square. Children peek at the soldiers with curiosity and wide-eyed wonder, while adults whisper softly to one another. For the civilians, the day has been a rare window into a world where kindness and authority coexist, where indulgence and structure intersect, and where fear can momentarily give way to trust. They have witnessed a human experiment unfold: how abundance offered without immediate threat can alter the psychology of those conditioned to scarcity, deprivation, and obedience under duress. The American soldiers, vigilant but unobtrusive, observe the unfolding tableau. They understand the subtle and lasting effects of what has occurred. The ice cream and Coca-Cola were more than treats. They were instruments of psychological diplomacy, bridges between victor and vanquished, demonstrations of power softened by humanity. The men watched the German soldiers begin to relax, noting how the simple act of shared indulgence fosters tentative trust, mild cooperation, and the reclamation of dignity. Even in this quiet moment, there are hints of lingering tension. Some German soldiers glance toward alleys, rooftops, and abandoned buildings, instincts honed by years of survival refusing to dissipate entirely. Their bodies remember deprivation and danger even as their senses rejoice in sweetness and fizz. Yet the balance achieved today, between indulgence and vigilance, pleasure and awareness, surrender and humanity, has set a precedent. It suggests that even in the aftermath of war, small gestures can transform relationships, soften suspicion, and plant seeds of mutual understanding. As the light fades, a young private licks the last drops of ice cream from his fingers, a faint smile playing across his face. He glances at a bottle of Coca-Cola in his other hand and raises it slightly toward a comrade, an unspoken gesture of shared experience and cautious trust. Across the square, others mirror the act, the remnants of indulgence becoming a subtle language of human connection. The war has shaped them, tested them, and left deep marks, but the day's unexpected generosity reminds them that life still holds simple pleasures, even in its harshest circumstances. The square grows quieter as night approaches. Ice cream tubs are empty, soda bottles are set aside, and the soldiers settle into stillness. The experience of the day, the sweetness, the novelty, the disbelief, and the laughter lingers in their senses. It is a day that will be remembered not for its battles or its losses, but for a momentary taste of peace, indulgence, and humanity. In the soft glow of twilight, the soldiers allow themselves to imagine that life, even after surrender, can contain more than scarcity and fear. And yet, as darkness falls over the town, the memory of deprivation and war remains, mingling with the fleeting joys of the day. The question persists quietly in every mind: how will the lessons of indulgence, trust, and simple pleasure carry forward into the uncertain days ahead? The ice cream and Coca-Cola have offered a glimpse, a brief reprieve, and a subtle shift in perspective, a humanizing moment that will linger far longer than the taste on their tongues. In the cool, still evening, the town seems to breathe collectively, the echoes of laughter, astonishment, and tentative joy fading into memory. The German soldiers, surrendered but alive, cautious yet indulgent, have experienced a rare intersection of humanity and authority, abundance and control. For one extraordinary day, sweetness triumphed over fear, indulgence softened suspicion, and the improbable became reality. Thank you for watching.